Amdal adalah salah satu instrumen perlindungan lingkungan hidup yang dikenal di seluruh dunia. Di Indonesia, Amdal dikenal dalam Undang-Undang Nomor 32 Tahun 2009 tentang Perlindungan dan Pengelolaan Lingkungan Hidup. Namun, berdasarkan data dari United Nations Environment Program pada tahun 2018, ditemukan adanya tren pelemahan instrumen Amdal di berbagai negara untuk mempercepat pertumbuhan ekonomi. Hal ini menunjukkan bahwa sekali lagi, dunia dihadapkan oleh pilihan antara pembangunan ekonomi dan perlindungan lingkungan hidup yang diposisikan sebagai sesuatu yang bertentangan. Sayangnya, hal ini harus terjadi di tengah degradasi lingkungan hidup dan ancaman krisis iklim yang terus menghantui. Kali ini, Aisel berkesempatan untuk mendengarkan pandangan Matthew Baird, Direktur Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law mengenai pengaturan Amdal yang baik dan korelasinya dengan pertumbuhan ekonomi berdasarkan risetnya mengenai Amdal di berbagai negara, khususnya negara-negara ASEAN. Wawancara ini diharapkan dapat memberikan pengetahuan mengenai peran Amdal dalam pembangunan berkelanjutan, sehingga tidak perlu lagi untuk mempertentangkan pertumbuhan ekonomi dengan perlindungan lingkungan hidup seperti berpuluh tahun yang lalu.
I think we have to remember that environmental impact assessment has been with us for about 50 years. Since the 1970s, we started on EIA. So a good EIA has a number of components: screening, scoping, collection by the EIA consultant, application to the government for review and assessment, and then once EIA is approved or rejected, there'll be an environmental compliance certificate with conditions attached, and then there'll be compliance, enforcement, and monitoring at the end. But most importantly, a good EIA needs full, complete transparency and public participation throughout the EIA process. So public participation and stakeholder consultation are fundamental to environmental impact assessment. In fact, I would say that if you don't have full public participation in EIA, you're not having a real EIA. Every country in the Mekong region and every country in ASEAN actually have a requirement for public participation. And Indonesia was one of the leading countries in Amdal for public participation and stakeholder engagement in its law. All financial institutions such as the ADB and IFC and World Bank and AIIB all require public participation. It's a fundamental part of EIA in China. And the most important thing that we've learned over 50 years of environmental impact assessment is public participation has to occur at the very beginning, right at the screening stage. And this is something that Cambodia has trialed over a number of years. It occurs in Myanmar and certainly in Thailand and Malaysia, that public participation is at the very beginning, but continues throughout the assessment process. Governments also organise meetings to inquire about community concerns, because it's about identifying the concerns of the community and other stakeholders within the EIA assessment process for the particular project. It should include all community that may be affected. It should include NGOs. It should include other industry bodies and other government ministries. Everyone and every organisation should have the opportunity to engage and to make submissions that can be considered both in the EIA assessment by the EIA consultant, but also in the review of the process by the government and by the relevant ministries. One of the things that Amdal had, which was a regional leader, was the role of the Environment Impact Assessment Committee, which also included community and civil society organisations. Cambodia and Myanmar also adopt a similar process where the community is actually represented on the committee that is looking at these particular projects. So one of the things that is also important is that the public participation should look at the ongoing impacts of the project. So after EIA is approved and the project is beginning, we are looking now at developing community consultative committees that last for the projects, and also operational grievance mechanisms that are set up by the company with full community participation to ensure that the project complies with its environmental and social obligations and its conditions of its EIA approval. So public participation should include everyone and should begin right at the very, very conception of the project until the project is operating and running, right until its closure or decommissioning. That's how important public participation is. This is a very good question, because a good EIA process or Amdal process is vital for sustainable development. And so the important thing is that international law recognises the importance of EIA prior to making a decision about whether a project should occur. At the moment, we're going through a transformation in investment for environmental and social governance issues, which last year reached $261 billion worth of investment in renewable energy, clean investment technology, urban development, clean water. And so the issue is that a good EIA is fundamental to ensuring that we can attract the investment. At the moment, one of the things that we have to worry about is that most financial institutions, including the World Bank, the IFC, the Asian Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, most of those banks and investment institutions all require good EIA as a precondition to approving those loans. So the important thing about a good EIA is it attracts good, high quality investment because the environmental and social impacts are avoided, or if they can't be avoided, they can be mitigated. And that's the true value of EIA. It attracts good, sustainable development into your country. Within ASEAN, the role of strategic environmental assessment or plan assessment has been growing significantly. Vietnam uses this extensively in its energy infrastructure investment, and that is to reduce the amount of investment it needs to produce the best environmental and energy outcomes. Myanmar has also adopted SEA as an important way of looking at hydropower sector, and that has recommended certain rivers shouldn't be dammed or used for hydropower, and that significant amounts of water can be protected for agriculture and industry and residential use. The important thing about strategic environmental assessment is it sets the parameters to look at the environmental and social constraints for large-scale projects or sectors. The important thing about that is it can then influence the idea of environmental impact assessment, which is project bank, specifically based on the projects. And following a good EIA, one can then identify what are the conditions that need to be attached to a particular project, such as an industrial zone, which then lead in to the idea of environmental permitting, which comes at the end of the process. Once you've fully assessed the strategic and then the project-specific environmental impact, then we can have our environmental permits, our pollution permits. This is a process that's adopted throughout many countries in ASEAN, including Malaysia with town planning, Thailand with its industrial zones, and partly it's a result of experience that have been learned. For example, the Mataput project in Thailand, which didn't have this connectivity, resulted in a significant amount of environmental pollution, which resulted in half the economic zone having to be closed and half the factories having to be closed because it couldn't meet environmental air pollution standards and environmental waste pollution standards. And that's why good EIA and good permitting ensures that you can actually attain and attract good investment, which can create the sustainable development that countries need.